So hi, we're here today on our VSGA podcast, Why Wool, and we're at Dave Martin's Irish Settlement Farm. Hi Dave.
Hi.
Thanks for having us here today.
Not a problem.
So I'm looking around here, and we've been walking around the farm and getting a tour, and I'd really love it if you could tell us a little bit about the history of this farm, the age of it, and what it was and what it is now, and talking about the adaptations of it from it being a dairy farm into a sheep farm.
Okay. This is Irish Settlement Road. It's called Irish Settlement because in the middle of the 19th century, there a group of Irish immigrants moved to the area and they settled along this road. There was a series of small subsistence farms, essentially. This farm here was based around the main barn is a 19th century dairy barn, timber framed. I don't know if it's considered an English bank barn or not, but some expert might be able to know. And I think one of the things as you look at my farm, it's a great history of the evolution of dairy farming in Vermont. And I think people need to understand that farmers didn't build a barn because it looked nice or would look nice in a picture in a catalog somewhere. They built it based on the dairy technology at the time. For instance, you can see that great big door in the peak of the barn. That was because all the hay at the time was harvested loose. It was piled on wagons and loose, brought up to the barn, and using a series of pulleys and forks, lifted up and stored in the barn, and then fed out loose. And the technology at the time really limited how many dairy cows a farmer could manage. And if you look at the back side of the barn, you can see at some point he expanded the barn, expanded it north, because as farmers today still try to increase the number of cows they milk, because that's how you make your money and you need to support your family. And then in 1956, the farmer expanded his barn yet again, much like modern dairy, always trying to adjust and to increase and maintain their level of income. The other thing I think farmers struggle with is the change from loose hay to baled hay. And then today farmers use those big round bales. Again, just the technology has changed over the years. And one of the people who grew up here as a child told me a story about the barn. And he said that if you look down at the milk house, he related that his father had hot water in the milk house before his mother had hot water in the house where they lived, because the health inspector and the milk inspectors insisted on having hot water in the barn. That was important. Another big change was the change from the 10-gallon milk cans to bulk tanks. Another huge change. Change that in which a lot of the small dairy farmers just were not able to make and had to go out of business. But as you look at my farm, and if you understand the history of dairy agriculture, you see how those changes evolved and changed the barn over time. The other little, as I was reading one day, I came across the 1838 Vermont Agricultural Census, which documented agriculture throughout Vermont. And in 1839, in Underhill, there were 3,300 sheep and a very, very few dairy cows. And I think that reflects the fact that at one point, early in the 19th century, wool was the major agricultural activity in Vermont, not dairy.
Actually, they called it the wool craze. I mean, it was that, the merinos.
I could go on for another hour on the history of the merino sheep in Addison County.
Right.
There is a great history that's available that I think is posted on the VSGA website. And if somebody would like me to send them a digital copy, I will. It gives an excellent history of the wool industry in Vermont. And as that changed, dairy grew in importance, and wool was less important.
Are you the first, were the people before you came here, and you said you've been here 25, 30 years, are you the first sheep farmer on this land?
No, I purchased this land from the American Farmland Trust, and the people who sold it to the Farmland Trust had raised sheep here.
Okay.
Yeah. Though at the time they leased the dairy part of the operation to a gentleman who tried dairy farming here. And frankly, this is not a very good place to try to make a living raising dairy.
Okay.
You know, there's hardly a level spot anywhere on the farm.
So this is better suited to sheep.
I think it's better suited to sheep.
Yeah. How many sheep do you raise here?
Right now, the most I had was about 120 ewes. I'm down to about 60 ewes now, just because I'm getting older. And
is that your ideal? Do you think that will fluctuate, or is that your ideal?
That's what I'm going to stay at that for now.
Okay.
So based on the amount of pasture I have, that's probably a good
for the land.
For the land I have. Yeah.
So I wanted to know what the primary product is that you produce on the farm, and is that consistent? Is it dependent on the year, what you're doing, or are you always adapting and changing according to the times and what people are looking for?
Yeah. Historically, my major product has been lamb. I sell lamb either through auctions. For a while, I was selling all my lambs through Black River Produce, and here's an interesting story that reflects one of the struggles of a sheep farmer in Vermont. Is for several years I sold my lambs through Black River Produce, and the lambs are processed at Vermont Packing House, and that was a good deal for me. It was a good deal for Black River Produce. And then Vermont Packing House announced suddenly that they were no longer going to process lambs, and because as the manager of the plant there told me that in a day I could do so many pigs or so many lambs. And any day that I do pigs, I make 50% more money. So from a business perspective, why would he, if he can fill up his days with beef or pigs, why would he do lambs? Yeah. So I lost that market, and it's a real struggle. And I think a lot of lamb producers come up against that, especially when they start calling around trying to schedule their lambs in to be processed. And the waiting list is a year out. I have a date on November 8th for a group of lambs, and I got that date over a year ago. So.
And has the market for lamb, what is your market for lamb? Who buys your lamb now?
I sell some lamb out of I have a freezer. I have a license from the state, and I have a couple of freezers in the barn. I have a gentleman who buys some of my lambs because he has some restaurant accounts. Last year I sold some lighter lambs as feeder lambs, and some lambs I've sold gone into the auction market. So auctions auctions are sort of like going to Las Vegas. You might get a decent price and you might not. You need to really pay attention because.
But you do wool as well.
But I do wool as well now because
you do with wool?
The sheep need to be shorn once a year.
Right.
And historically, I did not pay a whole lot of attention to that. There was occasionally in a wool pool where you get 40 or 50 cents a pound. But recently I've developed a couple other markets for my wool that pay me considerably more. I think it's worthwhile paying attention to the quality of your wool, avoiding plastic contamination. When you have your shearer come, be sure you're ready for the shearer, and you take. And one of my pieces of advice is that take care of your shearer. Be sure you're ready and set up when your shearer arrives. The electricity is there. The
sheep are dry.
The sheep are dry. The little things.
We've got a shearer on site here.
Behind
the camera.
Keep your shearer happy.
I'm staring them down as they're answering these questions.
Cup of coffee. Give her something.
Cup of coffee, some donuts.
Coffee and
donut.
Because if you don't, maybe next year you're going to have a hard time finding a shearer. Shearers are a valuable resource, and they can help you take care of your wool, store it properly, and then you see what you have for options in terms of maybe doing a little added income for it.
So do you feel that if someone was going to start and you're using a small flock, what is the more of a moneymaker for a farm? Say you're going to have a small farm, somebody wants to start. Would you think of that as a more meat market, a combined market, or a wool market? What would be something you think?
I think that's a conversation you should have. I guess I would recommend a dual purpose breed.
Dual purpose.
That's just would be my. That's what my sheep are. But I think that's a conversation you should have with yourself. Am I going to be focusing on wool, really high quality wool, and do Rambouillet or Columbia, and focus on that?
So tell us what your breeds are, so we know what your dual.
I have mainly a Montadale. It's a nice dual purpose animal. It was a breed, a combination of North Country Cheviot and Columbia. So it's worked well for me.
How did you choose that breed? What
I
made
got
you choose them?
Montadale because years ago somebody gave me a couple ewes. Just said they're out of the sheep. They said, can I drop the animals off? I said, oh, okay. And one of them was a Montadale, and she was a wonderful ewe. Lamb twins every year, excellent mother, no muss, no fuss. Her lambs grew well. She was a great ewe. We had her for several years, and I think just this spring, I finally had to put down the last of her offspring. It was that ewe. I kept that ewe. There was number 135. I kept her long past the time that it made any economic sense. I kept her for 2 years, even after she'd lost all of her teeth. And I kept her in the barn with her the buddy with the other ewe that was totally blind. So I had a blind ewe and a toothless ewe that if I was a quote real farmer, I would have loaded on a truck and shipped. But
I like that. I like the combination, because what I found with you here is you're talking about the things that you do and the importance of making the money, right? And understanding that I have to do this, and sometimes they have to be culled, and that's the reality of farming, even on a even smaller scale. But the deal is, what people aren't seeing is what we saw, which is those sheep following you across the field. So what I like about it is you clearly have good husbandry skills, and so talk a little bit about that. What is your feeling on the side of caring for your sheep, as opposed to just being a product?
Well, I think if you're going to be successful, you have to understand the nitty-gritty financial aspects of being a farmer. I think people get excited about the romance of farming, the imagery, the feelings that go with it, and forget that agriculture is a hard life. It's not like any other business in this country. It's tough, pretty unforgiving. And if you're going to be successful, I think you have to understand those aspects of agriculture, and understand that if you have a sick ewe and the ewe is worth $100, and if you call the vet, it's going to cost you $500. You think, can I really, as a business, would a business person spend $500 to save a $100 animal? And I think the answer is no. On the other hand, I have called the vet to save a ewe that I kind of liked, and spent $500 to save a $100 animal. I think you can do that as long as you're acknowledging to yourself that this isn't a business decision. This is a heart decision.
Right.
And I do make some of the really tough calls.
And there's if someone is thinking of doing it and beginning it, like you're talking about, having that conversation with yourself and understanding why you're doing it. How are you doing it? Are you doing it as something that you're doing for enjoyment? Then you can spend the money and you feel okay about it. Or are you doing it to try to be a business, and the understanding that agriculture is that business?
And just being comfortable with the decisions you make. And like, my example, we're taking care of a blind ewe and a toothless ewe for 2 years. And it's like, financially, that doesn't make any sense at all. That's dumb. But
But you wanted to.
but I want to. In 74, the blind ewe had a quirky personality, and 135 was the last daughter of that original Montadale ewe that I'd had.
Yeah.
So you make those choices.
Yeah.
And
I see you have such a beautiful expanse, and we'll share some of that on the site. But you rotationally graze your sheep. So we talked a little bit about. I'm interested in how often you move your sheep, what size the paddocks are that you choose to use, and do you move one flock at a time, in different places? What is your basic strategy?
But my basic strategy is I have I think 37 acres of pasture, and the way it's divided, it's into a series of fairly large paddocks, and it's essentially a circle. I start out in the first meadow, which is down there. The meadow we looked at, that's the Hovenkamp meadow, and that's where they start out in the spring. And in the spring, you're looking at the purchased hay you've got, and how is that grass growing. And there's always a temptation to turn your animals out on pasture sooner than you should, because if you turn your animals out on pasture too early, that sets the grass back, and it will take all summer to recover. So you need to wait until the grass is tall enough.
Do you think I've always understood that when it's blowing in the wind, that, when you're seeing the grass blowing in the wind?
That's a good way of looking at it, but boy, it's God, I don't want to, hay is awful expensive to feed, but I've got good discipline. I don't put them out until it's ready.
And do you agree with the analogy people are talking about, and the fact that the reality for a lot of sheep farming is that you're growing grass, that you're paying as much attention to your grass?
Well, your primary product is grass. If you want to
look at it, yeah, absolutely.
That's the way and then if you want to go even farther, you're harvesting sunshine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you look in that great big circle of life, whatever you want to talk about, but that's what it is, and I think you need to understand that dirt is not dirt, soil, and soil is an amazing living organism, and your job as a farmer is to support that living organism that is your soil, and understand that, and help the grass be successful, and understand that pasture management is fairly complex, and that you need to pay attention to it. So they go to the Hovenkamp pasture, and then there's a series of meadows that they circulate through that essentially makes a big circle. And it's the way it's set up is when it's time to move, I just walk to the gate and give a whistle, and I stand out of the way. They run through the gate together.
You did tell us about your secret weapon. Tell us about your secret weapon to get them to come.
I do not have a border collie. I think border collies are wonderful animals, but if they're not trained, I think they're more trouble than they're worth. I mean, they're a great animal, but they really need to work to be trained. Yeah. And my sheep are fairly used to me, and if I wanted to move them, a white plastic bucket with a couple pebbles in it or pieces of corn, you rattle that and they'll follow you anywhere. And having them follow you is easier than trying to be behind them and force them somewhere.
Right.
And when they move from paddock to paddock, I don't even need to do that. I just open the gate. And I come into the pasture, their heads come up and they watch me. And if they see me walking to the next gate,
they know.
They know, and I just have to get out of the way.
You know why, right?
Huh?
Because the grass is greener.
The grass is greener on the
grass is greener.
And I think, and they spend the summer rotating and watching, being careful not to overgraze. I think that's really important, because I think, like I said, grass is a living organism. If it's overgrazed, it sets it back, and it won't recover as quickly. There won't be as much feed. I think the other thing you need to watch for is you may look out on a meadow, and they may look like there's still a lot of grass there, but sheep are picky eaters, and there are some plants that they like better than others. And I think what can happen, especially if you have clover, is instead of eating the grass, they'll go back and regraze the clover. Mm-hmm. So when the first time they graze the clover, they graze it down to a certain point, and if you keep them there too long, they'll just keep going back and grazing that clover down. So you need to move them probably sooner than you would think. But that's a feeling you get over time. And I would like to put a plug in for the folks at U of M Extension in terms of understanding pasture management. And although it is complex and it's not simple, there's a lot of support and information out there, and there are a lot of experienced grazers who can help you understand that process and help you become a more successful sheep farmer.
Yeah, I've had they've come to our pasture and walked around with you and talked about how far to graze, and talking about the difference between rotational grazing, which is more on a schedule, and then the managed intensive grazing, where you're watching the grass and moving according to, because it changes every season, every summer. It's going to, some things are going to be faster, and
depending on the weather, and understanding those dynamics helps you make those decisions.
Do you make your decisions, like, do you go out and say, the grass looks like, they're done, this is done, we got to go?
I try not to. I shoot for 3 days, because my paddocks are really bigger than they should be. On my list of things to do was to divide up a couple of the paddocks, a smaller paddock. I just haven't had time to do that. I mean, there's a couple that really are too big. And
I was amazed. I had a vet come out and she said, cut that in half. Make them eat, make them be better grazers by encouraging them to finish the job and then move them faster. And moving them faster at certain times of year, and when the grass is growing faster. And
I think there's information out there to help you make those decisions. And I also don't think you should limit yourself or feel bad if you don't make perfect decisions. If your animals stay there a couple days longer than they should, well, okay. Keep going, keep learning, and it'll work out.
One of the things that I appreciated about them coming out was the idea that it has to work around life. Rare are the people who can do it all the time without an outside job, so the reality of being out there and moving your sheep every 10 minutes it's just not realistic for most people.
And I think there is an advantage to going to more than one of these pasture workshops. Because even I've been doing this for a while, but when I go to a workshop, I know I've picked up quite a bit. But I always pick up a new little insight, and I hadn't thought about that aspect quite that way. Or, that person manages their sheep this way. That's a good idea. Maybe sometimes you hear a message 2 or 3 times before it's like your brain goes, the
light goes on. Okay. I wanted to talk with you about that, because one of the things that I've appreciated is the support of the community when you're doing something like this. And you, as we know, are the head of VSGA. I like to call you the Grand Poopah.
Okay.
All right. And so, as such, one of the things that I appreciate is, I'm putting a plug in here for Dave Martin, because you send out so many opportunities that I wouldn't see otherwise, that about pasture workshops and grazing workshops and different things like that. And I'm personally so appreciative of that. What made you want to do this? Because I know, when I see it, I think to myself, Dave has a big farm. This is a lot of work for him to put this stuff out for us. So what made you want to do that?
Well, I think part of it is creating value for being a member of VSGA. I joined VSGA. This is a benefit.
Okay.
This is useful information.
Huge.
And one of the things I don't want to fill up people's inboxes with too much stuff, because there are some things I don't send out, although I may think, wow, that's really interesting, but I hesitate, because everybody's email inbox gets a lot of stuff.
Right.
And I try to balance that with, well, this is useful information, and hopeful that people will find it useful. And if I may send out a piece of information that only 5 or 6 people find interesting or useful, but that's okay.
Right.
But
Right.
because not every great opportunity people are people that are interested in.
Right.
And I think one of the things I've been pushing lately is the Agency of Agriculture is doing a lot of work in trying to support smaller scale agriculture. If you are a beginning farmer or thinking about being a beginning farmer, there are any number of grants out there to help you get started, to help you learn, to help you understand the finances, how to put together a business plan. And I really encourage people who are thinking about that, or have already decided, or have jumped in without knowing what they were doing, which is okay.
Right. And a lot.
It'd be better to educate first, but there's a lot of information and support available out there, and I think in Vermont there's some great opportunities in terms of smaller scale agriculture and being successful at it.
Yeah.
And I think I also support attempts to help the general public in Vermont support and understand smaller scale agriculture and support it by buying local produce, local meat. Although it may be more expensive, the dollar you spend on a local produce is a dollar that stays in your community. And I think in terms of that, and I'm not saying that all of your food purchases need to be local, but I think it's important that on occasion you make that decision to buy some local food and support your local farmer.
Right.
And again, getting back to the information that's available out there to help small scale farmers learn and progress as agricultural people. The information is there. I would really encourage people.
And the help, to go to these. We've done several of the programs, and they're just, everybody's friendly and sharing their knowledge, and I think that's an important piece of anything that you get good at is the willingness to pay it forward, the willingness to share that with other people. And that's something I really respect and admire about you, is your willingness to share. You're so open about letting someone learn from what you, and you learned it by leaving your gate open. So you're saying to me, don't leave your gate open.
Yeah, don't leave,
Right.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. The only dumb question is a question you had but didn't ask.
Yeah.
So never say, gosh, that's a dumb question. Ask it.
Yeah.
And a lot of my lessons were painful.
Right.
And I learned by mistakes. And if you have a question, ask, because somebody may have already learned that painful lesson, and there's no reason you have to make the same mistake. Because there's people who have already made that mistake, and they're more than happy to tell you, don't do that.
Right.
I did it, and this is what happened.
Right. And you see that back and forth on the computer. You see, if you're a member of VSGA, people write and say, thinking about this, what do you think of that? Or I did this and now I'm in trouble. How do I get out of it? And I see all the responses that happen, and I think to myself, how would you find that? Because people in small agriculture, they're usually pretty spaced out in a place like Vermont. So it's hard to find it if you don't have something like this.
And I there's a lot of support and advice out there that can help you be successful, and again, avoid those dumb mistakes. And you can, by talking to your neighbors, you can avoid that.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the programs, which was the wool loan deficiency payments, because that is something that is, people are thinking, and the reason that we called this Why Wool, even though we recognize that it's why lamb, why meat, but why wool? Because there's been such a push toward creating warmth from plastic, right? From changing that. And so part of that is financial. because people can't make the money from their wool anymore. So tell us about this program, because I got to tell you, when you told me about it, I was like, what? So tell us about that program.
It's a federal program. It's called the Wool Loan Deficiency Payment. If you can go online, and I don't fully understand all the behind. It's fairly complex.
And we have someone behind the camera who understands.
Yeah, go to your local FSA office. It's currently the LDP payment is 40 cents a pound for your wool. Okay, that is, so that includes your belly wool, that includes your tags. So you shear your sheep, you've got 100 pounds of wool.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that? The first thing you do is contact your local FSA office. They'll help you fill out the paperwork. The paperwork is fairly simple and straightforward. I found that there were a couple of sections on it where you need to have the FSA officer translate it from government speak to regular English.
Yeah.
But that was minor. So there's a little bit of paperwork. You fill that form out, you send it in, it gets approved, and you get paid 40 cents a pound for your wool. And then you get to market your wool.
Yeah. You get to use the wool anyway.
You still get to sell the wool.
Yeah.
So if you took your wool to a wool pool and got 50 cents a pound, that would mean that you would have got the 50 cents a pound at the wool pool, then you get 40 cents a pound for LDP. It's a government payment.
Yeah.
And my guess is that some people are saying, well, that's a government payment. That's government welfare or whatever. My philosophy is if you're trying to be a business, businesses do not leave money on the table.
Yeah.
ExxonMobil gets government handouts. Huge corporations get a lot of different government handouts. So this is money that's there. It's for you.
Right.
Wool growers out west get thousands of dollars. I think I sent out a few months ago how much the New York wool growers and how much the wool growers in Texas got last year in LDP payment. It's a chunk of change. The only major requirement is you have to sign a form that certifies that you did not make more than $900,000 last year.
Which disqualifies me.
So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, some may be disqualified. Yeah, but that's a federal. That was because the politicians were saying, this is a government program, and if you're making $1 million a year, how much more support do you need?
Right.
So, and so I think it's a good program. It's a minimal amount of paperwork.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, but that's the beautiful thing about belonging to an organization, and that you're the head of, is showing us that, telling us about those opportunities, right? I mean, that's something that, like I said, I'm very appreciative of, and people need that support when they're trying to. Even if you're doing it and you're not trying to make it your main source of income, it still is something that you don't want to lose money on. Like you said, leaving it on the table is ridiculous.
Yeah, I really. Then if you're in agriculture, you try to squeeze every penny you can out of your operation.
Right.
And your goal may be simply to not lose quite as much. Right. Which is that's a legitimate goal.
Yeah. And I feel like. You're going down. It causes you to think about things. I think farming causes you to think about a lot of things in a different way. The things that don't bother you, that used to bother you. You're getting dirty, this and that. All those kinds of things. But it also causes you to think, if I'm using this corn and I paid for this corn, what am I getting for this corn? What is that corn's turnaround ultimately for me? So it really does cause you to think about. Like that big circle, like you talked about, between the grass and the feed and the animal.
Yeah, and I think if you look out there, you can see my manure spreader and the pile of manure. That's for my. I use a bedded pack in my barn during the winter. So all the sheep are fed undercover, and then they build up a bedded pack.
Right.
And I muck that out, and I stack it. And this fall. Another one on my list of things to do is just get that manure spread.
Right.
Which again, if I look at it in terms of recycling the nutrients back onto my pasture.
Right.
which I think is important. And I know sometimes my neighbors would like to buy some of my manure, and I will let them. I'll sell them some, but it's reluctantly,
Right.
because way I look at it, that pile of manure isn't just a pile of manure. That's nutrients. It's contributing to the health of my pastures,
Right.
and it's an investment I've made. I've been spreading manure out on my farm for 20-something years.
Right.
So I think it's a cycle.
Right.
That's important.
And I think it's important too. I was just thinking about that. You know, we have a 1950s spreader and a 1940s tractor,
Yeah.
and that, but also like liming. You know, doing something to your pasture. I don't want people to think that they have to have huge amount. I think people think they have to have huge amounts of equipment, whereas we can do some seeding and things right out of. You know, I was pulled around on the tractor and flung lime, because I didn't have resources to put a big truck full out.
Yeah.
And people can still do those
Yeah.
things.
It's an issue of scale, and I would also encourage people to invest in a soil test. That can be be helpful in terms of improving your pastures. What do your pastures need to make maximum growth? That's important.
So Dave, when we say all these things, what would you list as some incentives? So monetary or not? Because one of the things you and I talked about before is there are things besides money why you do this. So what are some things, if someone is like, I'm kind of on the fence about this, and what are some things that you would say besides the money that you can make are reasons to go into this?
I think after I shear my ewes in February or end of January, I know a couple of years ago I was bedding with straw. I was getting these big Western bales of straw. They're like 900 pounds and expensive, but it's important. And I go down to the barn at midnight, 2 o'clock, to do a lamb check, and I flip on the lights. And I look down through the barn, and there's a freshly shorn ewes, all nice and white, bedded down in this deep straw pack, and the lights are on, and it's just beautiful. It's just a moment of like, oh, that's pretty. And there's no economic sense to that. It's just it's pretty. The other really big thing I like is, especially early in the spring, as the grass is greening up, and I let the animals out on pasture, the lambs and their mothers. And I go out there and just stand and watch the ewes and their lambs grazing. There's satisfaction from that. There's satisfaction from watching my yearlings. They spend the summer across the road behind Flexinet and going out. And every year I look out and I say, boy, that's the best looking group of yearlings I've ever had. And my wife says, Dave, you say that every year. But it's true every year. Yeah. But looking at that, boy, that's a nice looking group of lambs. And this year's yearlings, that's the same sort of feeling. Oh, that's nice.
And they are a direct result of your work.
Of decisions and things that I've made. And it's just, it feels good.
I also think that when we think about having land that is just mowed for mowing, right? I understand that, but what I like is the idea that we are caretaking the land. I will return the land when I'm gone in better condition than when I got it. Yeah. And there's something that's deeply satisfying about your place on the earth being better because you were there, not worse.
And I think one of the insights I have on that is people buy a hunk of land and it's their land and they can do with it what they want because it's theirs. They own it, which is fine. But if you take a step back, your ownership of that land is only one small little piece of the history of that land. You know, I own this land here; it's mine. But in terms of the history of this land, it was here before I was born. It'll be here after I die. I'm a caretaker.
Right.
In some sense, it's not mine. I'm just I take care in the great scheme of things for a very small piece of time. And if you look at it like that, that gives you a better sense of perspective. Take care of the land and try to be sure that it's in better shape than when you got it.
And understanding the responsibility of that.
And
I think
the
we'd be a better world if we could all kind of take that to heart,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So that said, too, living this life, a purposeful life, what would you say the best part of living this life is? Beyond just the small individual things, what's the best part for you of living this life? That why you don't want to be, in an office every day, or, what is the best part for you?
Well, one thing is the only reason I can afford this farm is because I worked every day,
Yeah.
which I think applies to a lot of VSGA members,
Yes, for
which
sure.
is just the reality.
Right.
It's a lot of work. I take pleasure in a lot of the chores I do. Things like building a fence, and I put in a new section of fence, and I stop, I turn around, I look back, and there's this like straight section of brand new fence, and it's like feeling of satisfaction, of confidence, of mastery. I don't know. I feel good about decisions I've made. One of the drawbacks sometimes is if I lose an animal. That's always hard.
That's what I was going to say. So there's a good part, but there is a hard part.
Yeah,
Decisions you have to make, culling, and those must be difficult.
And animals get sick, and you have to put an animal down, and I do that. And understand that's part of life, part of being agriculture.
Right. Was that something that was difficult? Was that a really difficult part for you?
I don't know if not really difficult, but not something I look forward to.
Right, of course.
That had no teeth. God knows how old she was. I put her down this spring, and I knew I had to do it, and put it off for a few days. But I said, fine. Something I had to do.
Right.
Hi, Charles.
So that's one of the hardest parts of things for you. Yeah.
Whenever if I lose a lamb or you, one of the questions I always ask, and I think everybody should ask, is that just something that happened, or is that a bad shepherd? Is it my fault? If I had been paying more attention, could this have been avoided? And I think if you lose an animal, you should always ask yourself that. Sometimes sheep just die. They just do. But why did that animal die? Is it because you were too busy and you didn't check during lambing? You didn't, when you went down at midnight, you didn't look around the corner and until the next morning. And if I noticed that last night, you had a different outcome. Right. And acknowledge those mistakes.
And accepting that as part of the great responsibility of being a shepherd.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about at the beginning, there is, it's wonderful to say, I'm going, like you said, the romance of farming, and then the death is a reality of it, and the responsibility is a reality. The financial responsibility, I always tell my husband, we always feel that animals come first. You get up in the morning, animals eat first. Right? They have that responsibility. So if you had one piece of advice, take a minute and think, so someone wants to do this, what would be your one piece of advice for them?
In terms of?
In starting this, what would be most important in someone wanting to get into this kind of farming?
I think that there's a lot of information out there that's available. I think take advantage of that. Talk to some people who have animals and
get the real deal.
Get their insights. And if you're excited about the romance or whatever it is about agriculture, that's okay. But I think you'll have a better outcome if you do a little research and are clear about your reasons. If you want to get into sheep, if you want to make a lot of money, getting the sheep is probably not the way to go. I think if the money that I've invested in this farm, if I'd invested it in stocks and bonds, I'd probably be driving a Mercedes or something. But I've been rewarded in a lot of other ways. But I think being opening your mind to the conversation and the thoughts, and before jumping in, do some research. Talk to people.
And join VSGA.
And join VSGA. There's a lot of information there, and I think people have been noticed. There's been COVID, but one of the outcomes from COVID has been there's a whole series of webinars that are useful. I've participated in a lot of them, and some of them are more useful than others. Some are like from out in the Midwest are designed for people with 700 ewes.
Right.
But even if you only have 5 ewes, there's value in those videos.
Right.
And I think I encourage people to check them out.
Right.
There's a lot of information there, and like I said before, there's some mistakes that you don't need to make because there's people out there that have already made them, and they're more than happy to say,
Share it.
this is what I learned.
Yeah.
So
Dave, one of the best parts of being chosen to be part of the podcast is that you get to tell us where we can find your stuff.
I will be in the middle of November. I will have lamb to sell out of my freezer, and I usually post it on Front Porch Forum.
Okay. Tell us again the name of your farm.
Settlement Farm.
Dave Martin.
And I have a site on Dig in Vermont, so you can find me there. Although I need to update it, that needs to be tweaked. I would also encourage VSGA members to consider joining Dig in Vermont. It's part of the Vermont Fresh Network, and if you're into trying to market your products, I think that's another way of doing that. Because if you're trying to market your products, you need to be in a lot of platforms.
Right.
You need so that
Right.
as people are surfing the web, they say, "Oh, what's Settlement Farm?" Oh, they click on it,
Yeah.
and chances are they're not gonna. That doesn't mean they're gonna come and buy a lot of stuff, but it's somebody who is now aware of it, and they might. And
Put you in the forefront.
I don't have any fleeces to sell, but you can go to Muriel's. It's, up in the islands. They make beautiful sweaters out of my wool. And the Bobolink yarn is also on this site. She makes wonderful socks out of. She focuses on making wool products out of Vermont wool, and the characteristics of Vermont wool. Some excellent products. And also the Junction Fiber Mill. Some of my products will be down there. So that's important. And I think one of the other things I say, like a broken record, is it's important for members of the small agricultural community to support each other, to share information about each other, and because that if one of you is doing well, that helps other people doing well. We're not necessarily in direct competition, but it's a process of getting the message out to the Vermont public as a whole that small scale Vermont agriculture is a good thing. Check it out. Try to spend a few bucks, because any dollar you spend on a Vermont ag product, it's a dollar that stays in Vermont. And I think that's a good thing.
We want to keep that. We want to keep that way of life.
Yeah. Try to keep it. And I don't know that anybody's going to make $1 million, but it would be nice to make a couple bucks.
Right.
And if everybody in the system, as a product goes through the system, everybody each step on the way that somebody makes a couple bucks, everybody comes out ahead.
Absolutely.
Part of the line is everybody needs to make a couple bucks.
Well, thank you so much.
No
It has
problem.
been really wonderful to talk with you this afternoon, and we appreciate it. So we are Dave Martin, and thank you so much.